Open an English Bible to nearly any page, and you will encounter words like mercy, steadfast love, or lovingkindness. While they seem like distinct concepts, the original text often reveals they are all translations of a single Hebrew word, Hesed. Because the Hebrew language has a smaller vocabulary than English, individual words often carry a massive density of meaning. Hesed appears over 240 times in the Old Testament, functioning as a recurring anchor for the biblical narrative that English lacks a direct equivalent for. To grasp its meaning, you have to layer 4 separate ideas together. There is loyal love that refuses to quit when relationships get difficult, covenant faithfulness bound to a promise, mercy that offers what is not deserved, and active kindness translating feelings into deeds. This multi-layered word presents God as a relentlessly pursuing force. Understanding it shifts our perspective of the divine character toward one of active, committed engagement with humanity. The most significant definition of this word occurs at Mount Sinai during a moment of profound crisis. While Moses was on the mountain receiving the 10 Commandments, the Israelites built a golden calf to worship. They broke their fresh covenant before the ink was even dry. Despite the betrayal, Moses interceded for the people. He stood between their rebellion and the consequences of their actions, pleading with God to remember his promises to their ancestors. In response, God passed before Moses and declared his own character. He described himself as merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abounding in goodness and truth. In the original text, goodness and truth are Hesed and Emet, loyal love cared with absolute faithfulness. God chose to define himself with this word in the immediate aftermath of betrayal. It suggests that Hesed is a love specifically designed for seasons of brokenness and failure. This attribute eventually moved from a divine declaration to a human action in the fields of Bethlehem. A widow named Ruth chose to stay with her mother-in-law, Naomi, despite having no legal obligation to do so. She abandoned her own security to show loyalty to a family that could offer her nothing in return. While gleaning in the fields to survive, Ruth met a man named Boaz. He occupied a role called the Goel, or kinsman-redeemer. Ancient law allowed a close relative to step in and pay the full price to restore land and family lines for those who had lost everything. Boaz recognized Ruth's loyalty and responded with his own act of redemption. This illustrates a core trait of Hesed. It possesses a memory. When one person acts with covenant loyalty, it often triggers a cycle of kindness in others. This quiet act of loyalty in a barley field had historical consequences. Boaz and Ruth became the ancestors of King David, and eventually the Messiah. Small-scale acts of Hesed provide the structure for the larger biblical story. During his reign, King David sought to honor a covenant he had made with his friend Jonathan.
In a culture where new kings typically executed the families of their rivals, David proactively searched for a survivor from the house of Saul to whom he could show Hesed. He found Mephibosheth, a prince who had been crippled in his feet during a childhood accident. Mephibosheth was living in a wasteland called Lodabar, a name meaning place of nothing. When summoned before David, he described himself as a dead dog, expecting execution. David responded by restoring Mephibosheth's family lands and giving him a permanent seat at the royal table. He gave an outcast the status of a son. The text notes that Mephibosheth remained lame in both his feet. Hesed changed his position without necessarily removing his physical brokenness. At the king's table, his status as a guest took precedence over his condition. When Jerusalem was destroyed in 586 BC, the nation faced total catastrophe. The temple was ruined and the people were exiled. Sitting in the ruins, the prophet Jeremiah wrote that God's mercies, the plural of Hesed, are new every morning. Even in national ruin, he looked to the character of God as his primary source of hope. This highlights the difference between a love based on human performance and one based on divine character. Jeremiah's confidence survived because it was rooted in something that did not shift with the circumstances. Hesed is the force that survives the disaster. It proves that the character God declared at Sinai remains unchanged, even when human systems collapse. As the scriptures transitioned from Hebrew to Greek, writers used words like agape and eleos to carry the weight of Hesed.
The singular Hebrew concept expanded into a broader vocabulary of unconditional love and compassion. Jesus frequently pointed back to this concept, quoting Hosea's declaration that God desires Hesed over sacrifice. He taught that religious rituals are hollow if not built on a foundation of loyal love. Every major action of Jesus' ministry mapped onto these historical layers. He sought out the outcasts in their own versions of Lo-debar and acted as the Redeemer who paid the price to restore what was lost. The New Testament presents Jesus as the physical embodiment of the loyal covenant love God described to Moses. This attribute meets people where they are. Like the search for Mephibosheth, it does not wait for a person to improve their circumstances before it reaches out to them. The declaration at the golden calf establishes that no failure disqualifies a person. Instead, it is an open invitation to a permanent seat at a table that completely covers the past. Israel turned this into a liturgical rhythm in Psalm 136, repeating the phrase, "For his Hesed endures forever," 26 times. They used it to process everything, from the creation of the stars to their daily provision of food. Hesed remains an eternal attribute, holding the storyline of the universe together regardless of shifting seasons. It is the core of who God is,